Somebody asked why I referred to that as the Poseidon. That's kind of a joke. It's the trident on the end of Neptune's staff, or Poseidon in Greek mythology. I know a bit more about Greek mythology than otherwise. So I was kind of joking, and I referred to that as the Poseidon. However, that does have a meaning, and to quote I think it's Maserati of Raleigh, they say that the three prongs are the three-pronged approach to Maserati's, car building equality or whatever. They stand for vivid driving experience, superior technology, and handcrafted luxury, which I think was probably true until the 80s when they made this car and it basically destroyed the company. What's funny is that Mercedes has a similar three-pronged thing. Theirs, I believe, stands for each prong. One is for land power, one is for air power, and one is for sea power, because they were making engines for all of those things. So that's maybe a bit of history as to why I was saying that. Let's take a look under the hood, because people want to see what's underneath there. So this is a fuel-injected engine. It's not the carbureted editions that basically made a bad name for these cars. So this is the intake plenum here. We got the throttle body here. And we got a bunch of hoses and miscellaneous things. So let's see if we can help disambiguate this a little bit. A lot of this is similar to a modern fuel-injected engine. We have the fuel injectors here. It's port injected. Fuel rail here. Each side has a fuel rail, so there's one on this side as well. These are the returns from the fuel line. This is the feed to the fuel rails, and the returns both go into the airbox. In the airbox, there is there's a boost referenced fuel pressure regulator. So it has a little line that goes into the intake manifold. You can't see it, it's inside the airbox. I'm not taking that apart. That changes the fuel rail pressure based on the boost in the engine to compensate for boost. The valve covers on this are interesting. I don't know if this is true or not. However, it looks for all the world to me like they can go on either side. Because if you look at this one, it's supposed to have little air ducts that go through here. On this one, the filler cap is there, and if we take a walk around the other side, the filler cap's on the front. So it looks for all the world to me like they flip around. That's kind of cool. What other hoses and mess do we have? So we have this hose here that goes from the intake manifold. This is the intake plenum thing. I think that's the idle air control valve, because it goes to this and then grabs auxiliary air in. We got the throttle position sensor. We have the distributor, which actually has two coils. Inside of there is a bizarre twin rotor thing. I don't know. All I know is that they're extremely expensive because they're also used on the Ferrari F40. So they're like $300. Let's see, what else do we have that's probably confusing? So we have all this piping and stuff. So let's start taking a look at what all that piping and stuff does. This is fairly symmetrical on some of this. So from the airbox here, this is the inlet air to this side's turbo. This air goes through this pipe, tiny little charge pipe, down into the turbocharger. And you can see the other one right there, where the air comes out of the turbocharger, the pressurized air. It goes and disappears. And it goes into, you can kind of see the elbow right in there. It goes into this intercooler on this side. It comes out of this intercooler, right there. It goes along and into the intake manifold. The other side has a similar thing going on. Here's the air inlet into the turbocharger, goes down through here into the turbocharger. Goes out through that pipe into this. Oh, look, we got more little tridents on there too. You can't see it on that one because it's the same intercooler, just flipped around 180 degrees. That intercooler is all oily, and I think that turbo is leaking oil. I'm pretty sure that turbo leaks oil, so it needs to be rebuilt. I'll rebuild them both at some point. So that explains some of the hoses we have going on here. These two hoses are the engine coolant. in a system I have never seen before in my life. They both go into the same side of the radiator. One goes down there on the bottom, you can see it. I'm guessing that sensor right there is for the fan switch. Most older cars I've seen have the fan switch on the radiator itself on the end tank. This goes in here. I'm assuming this is the return and this is the supply because the return is usually in the top. I'm guessing the thermostat is probably somewhere down in that mess where we have what looks like an engine coolant temperature sensor there, what looks like an engine coolant temperature sensor there, and what is also looks like an engine coolant temperature sensor. Well, it's a vacuum sensor, so as it heats up, it diverts vacuum somehow. I'm guessing there's a sensor for the gauge and also a sensor for the ECU. Generally, older cars work like that. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure how this radiator works, but if we spin around and look in at that radiator, you can see it has tubes going side to side between the two end tanks. Not really sure how that works. While we're looking at this, we look at the radiator fan wiring. There's an interesting service bulletin that's actually listed in the the factory service manual, which instructs how to reroute the fan wiring. You can see this fan wiring goes up over the top of the radiator and then down. Originally, it went down the bottom and over. And the manual simply states that in some circumstances, the engine doesn't run properly unless the wires are routed away from the crank, which doesn't make any sense at first blush. However, what I think is going on there is it uses a Hall effect pickup sensor. We can take a look underneath the car in a minute. It uses a Hall effect pickup sensor with external reluctor lobes on the crank pulley. And I'm wondering if the noisy electromagnetic field from a DC electric motor was actually inducing some noise into that Hall effect sensor and making it not run properly or giving it a bad signal to the ECU. Kind of interesting. Here we have the air injection system. I can't claim to know how this works very much, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. So we have some valvey things here. We have right here, I think that's probably the air inlet to the whole system. There's some pipes and stuff. There's, above the exhaust manifold, there's this little tiny exhaust manifold. It's hard to see it, but it has little tubes. You can kind of see it right there. Little tubes that go into the head right above the actual exhaust manifold. And that goes around and disappears into this, here it is. So here's the one from the other side, and here's one from the side we just looked at, and those go into that pipe, and that goes into the bottom of this. And then that has a hose that disappears under the engine somewhere, and this hose disappears, I don't know where it goes. Oh, that hose goes into, so we have a belt-driven air pump right here. So I'm pretty sure that's the pump for the air injection system. And when we go into the car, we can see more of that system. It works, it runs well. I'm not going to mess with it, but I don't really understand how it works. So that's kind of a problem. I like not knowing how things work. So on the engine, we have this thing right here. There's a little hose that goes from there into it. So that's a manifold air pressure sensor. I'm going to go ahead and guess that since we have a manifold air pressure sensor here, that's an intake air temperature sensor. We also, underneath this, have another little tube that comes off right here. And that goes down and disappears. It goes into the dashboard, and I'm pretty sure that's what goes to the gauge on the dash, the turbo pressure gauge. Yeah, all kinds of stuff. I'm not really sure how the brake booster gets its vacuum, where it gets its vacuum from. There is a vacuum, I keep putting my fingers up it. There is a vacuum pump. So if we look underneath here, it's hard to see without jacking it up. We have air horns. So if we look underneath here, we have air horns. And if we look, reach that down in there, and look up, come on, can we see it? Somewhere in there. There it is. That's a vacuum pump. So when you turn the key on, it was running non-stop, but I've since fixed all the vacuum leaks and now it doesn't run non-stop anymore. It connects into these vacuum accumulators. This vacuum accumulator has a hose here that goes off into the dash and that runs the HVAC stuff. This vacuum accumulator has a hose that comes off of it and goes, I have honestly no idea where it goes. It goes into the engine somewhere and disappears. So I don't know what that runs. Maybe it goes to the injection system. That hose might actually go all the way over to the top of that one. Not sure. We have more hoses. Let's see. Let's just see if we can hit all the hoses underneath here. We got hoses that go into that thing. 2 of the hoses into that thing. There's one here. So that one goes into the air box right there. And then these 2 other hoses, where those go is they go into the turbochargers. But I'm not sure what in the turbochargers they actually do. I can't quite get a good picture. I think that's something to do with the boost control system that goes into the ECU and that tells it how to not overboost. Or if it is overboosting, right, they go to here and there's a little T and it goes down into the turbos. And that keeps it from overboosting somehow. Let's see what else. There's all the spark plugs. There's one there. There's one there. There's one there. The spark plug wires are really dry rotted and cracked, so I want to replace those or get replacements before I bother taking the spark plugs out. Oh, what other hoses have I missed? I'm sure there's something. We got this hose here. It goes into with the charcoal canister. I don't really know how that works, other than it probably works the same as a charcoal canister on any car. When you're cruising along, not using boost, and you're under vacuum, it sucks fumes back from the tank and puts a slight vacuum on the tank. You got the brake master cylinder. The fuel lines on this are routed in the most psychotic way I've ever seen in my life. These are the fuel lines, I think. And they go behind, underneath the windshield wiper mechanism. They disappear and they come out over there, and then they wrap around and come all the way back to this side where it comes out into the fuel feed. So they take a giant loop underneath the cowl. I don't know why. That, I'm guessing, is probably the resistor for the blower motor. And underneath here, there's actually nothing underneath there. You can reach underneath there. I thought it was like a computer or something. It's a cover for the air intake, I think, for the HVAC. Got the wiper motor, which is kind of broken, but it does work. Intermittent doesn't work, and the wipers stop anywhere you turn them off. They don't dock home. So there's a... If I get brave, I'll pop this plastic cover off and see if I can make it worse than when I started. What else? What else? The air conditioning system on this is... I don't quite understand it. So in the factory service manual, there's 2 types of air conditioning. One type that has, so right here is the air conditioning, what is it called? The one that takes, after it evaporates and cools off inside the car, it condenses back into liquid. The condenser, so the condenser's on the front, and then down here, an extremely beat up, destroyed condenser across the whole front of the car. And the manual says it only has this one if you have the automatic climate control. This doesn't appear to have automatic climate control. It has a heat slider that goes from cold to hot with a cable attached to it. So I have no idea. Anyway, let's get on the creeper and crawl underneath the car and see if we can find more fun stuff. So underneath the car, we have, there's the crank position sensor, and you can see the little triggers. Looks like they took a stock carbureted one and just drilled holes in it and put those little pegs. So yeah, I can see how that would be disrupted by a large EMI field. Got the air conditioning compressor with some JB Weld on it, and I hope I never have to touch that, but I'm sure I will. There's the oil filter. You have to remove the radiator. You don't have to remove the radiator. You got to jack the radiator up, remove this air conditioning condenser, and drop the sway bar to get it out. It's a lot of fun. Kind of smells like fuel underneath here. I don't like that. Here's just hoses for the air conditioning system. Oil pan is pretty beat up. I'm not sure how no one ever broke that. alternator. If we look back, you can see that hose right there, that black hose, goes all the way back to there, to the catalytic converter. So it appears that, I'm guessing it injects air all the way back into the catalytic converter. I have no idea what the little tiny exhaust manifold does. That goes into the air injection system. Anything else exciting underneath the car? Not really, other than the fact that you can't see anything. Before I forget, another psychotic thing with this. So we looked underneath and we saw the air horns and the vacuum pump underneath the car. But then if we look underneath the power steering reservoir, you can kind of sort of just half barely see the green connector going into it. That's the pump for the air horns. So I don't know why they didn't put the pump there for the vacuum pump and put the air horn pump next to the air horns, but that's what they did. Oh yeah. One of the better things on this. The fuse. So if we look at the fuse panel on this car. Let's see. There's the fuse box right there. If we take it off, come on. If we take it off and look at it, there's a fuel pump symbol right there in position number 2. And it has these stupid fuses that everyone hates. So there's that fuel pump symbol in position number 2, and you noticed mine had a fuse in it. The manual states that if you have a sunroof, which I do, there's a fuse in position 2 to protect the sunroof. However, if you don't have a sunroof, there is no fuse in position 2, the position for the fuel pump. The reason for that is because one of those relays there, of course it's not marked, or it could be one of those relays, is the fuel pump relay, and you can see they all have fuses built into the relays. So they put a fuse icon, or put a fuel pump icon for the fuel pump in the fuse box, and then they used it for the sunroof, and instead they fused the fuel pump through one of these relays. Gonna let that sink in for a minute. Alright. If that made sense to anybody, that's more sense than it ever made to me. I don't know. What else? Yeah. Here's a good example of it. That's actually a terrible example of it. That's the first time I've seen the wires go into a connector and come out of the connector the same color. Almost every connector on this car, the wires go in and come out as a different color. Which is really fun and completely confusing. I think this is all the wiring for the ricey lights on the front, including this button that doesn't do anything. These lights right here. Those ones. There's some rice on this car that needs to go away, like, I hate those things.